Someone You Should Know. A program about people you know, and even more that you don't. Hosted by Stuart Sax, veteran, husband, father, and grandfather. Now, here's your host, Stuart Sax.
Well, welcome to another edition of Someone You Should Know. Glad to have you with me today. We're going to have a very, very interesting conversation. And we are brought to you today by the DFW networking diva, Christine Dean, who is the sponsor of this program. She is also the producer of this program, which means she knows what it's all about when it comes to this technology that we call the internet and social media. If you have any questions about it, you can have a free consultation with Christine. Just reach out to her. She'll take good care of you. And all that consultation is free. That's how I got her. That's how it all started, folks. Well, there are some of you that may not believe in fate. I do. And it just so happened that a few weeks back, I needed some body work done on my car. And I went over to our good friend Joe Yanessa over at Automotive Solutions Automotive. And while I was waiting to see Joe, there's a gentleman sitting in the waiting room. And I happened to notice he's wearing a cap and it says survivor of the London Blitz. And I thought, now that is really kind of interesting. I walked over, I said, thank you for your service. We started up a conversation, and all of a sudden I got so much information within a few minutes from this gentleman. I said, time out, wait a minute. I got to get you on my radio show. So Someone You Should Know, David Huntley is with us today, and I am so thankful to have you with me today, David.
It's my pleasure, Stuart. It was really a pleasure meeting you as well. Thank you very much.
And as I say, it was just fate. I mean, you didn't know that I was a guy that had a podcast every week, and I didn't know any of your background, and we just started to chat. We exchanged cards. And that's what brought us here today, because you have just fascinating stories to tell, both in your personal life, your business career. You are now an author, and we're going to be discussing a little bit of that. So why don't we really kind of start in the beginning? Obviously, you have an accent, so you are not from Texas originally.
I'm not from Texas originally. I am from England, and I was born in London, and I went through the London Blitz. Yes, and I came here in Texas. We lived in Africa for about 21 years before coming here, and we came here about 43 years ago. And by the way, I might have a funny accent, but I now speak Texan because I can say y'all.
Y'all. and you say it very, very well too.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Well, and I will tell the audience throughout the show, we'll try and give you some information about if you want to reach out to David, and I'll be via his email address or his phone number. I will give that to you. And also, David occasionally is going to call out a photo number, because as we're talking about something, Christine is also going to be sharing the screen and showing you some fascinating photos that David will also be talking about. So I just want to kind of set that up so you'll know what's going on. So David, at any time when we're talking, if you want to refer to any of those photos, just shout out that number and Christine will share it on the screen.
No problem.
So you grew up in England.
Yes, I grew up in England, right.
All of your childhood and through college and what did you study and all that?
Then after that, of course, going through from the beginning, and by the way, I'll take my hat off, but that's what it says up there, World War II survivor, London Blitz. So I take it off and I'll show you my bald head now. You might see another picture in a little while in which I've got hair, but yeah, London during the Blitz, 1940, 1945, was pretty devastating. If you look at Ukraine as it is now, that's pretty much what London was. It was pretty devastating. You can see, if you bring up a picture of my house, for example, or let's put up a picture of where the bombs fell on London. Number 3, the total number of bombs that fell on London, you can hardly see London from the illustration of all the bombs that fell. They're all in little red dots. That's what it looks like.
Goodness.
Then in the next picture, which is number 4, you'll see where the bombs, some bombs fell around our house. And you see a little arrow that's pointing to the house on the corner, and there's a few bombs around it. Now, some of the bombs are incendiary bombs, and some are fully high explosive bombs. We did not get a hit, but some house, a couple of houses across the road got completely demolished. We were fortunate in as much that we had a cellar, a coal cellar, in which we could retreat underground in the coal cellar. And you would see the house, by the way, is number 5. And we would go into the coal cellar to protect my father. And by the way, my father was in World War I and II. He was in World War I. Then later, because he was so young, he was called up for the Second World War, and he served and was wounded and evacuated at Dunkirk. This is the house that you see in front of you. And we got a few broken windows and so on, but we were fortunate. We also had another shelter inside the house, and many people in America have never seen this before, but they are called Morrison shelters. And that you will find on picture number 10. And the Morrison shelter it's got a thick steel slab on top. It looks like a big table, and it's made of solid steel. And on the top, there's a thick steel slab, and you see people sitting around. We're eating our meal off of that, but underneath, you could sleep underneath, and it's got wire mesh. It would be enough to withstand any debris or rubble when the house collapses on top of the shelter. And so some of us kids, we used to sleep underneath that when the raids were on, and so on.
Now, was this kind of common architecture at the time that, when were these kinds of tables and everything and shelters within the homes kind of developed? Was it because after World War I or
No. This is right during the Blitz.
Oh, okay.
This is during the Blitz. And we were fortunate in our house had a cellar. A lot of people, thousands of people didn't have cellars, and they had to go to shelters or under the underground, as you well know.
Like here in Texas. I mean, we don't have basements here.
Right. So the same thing, but many houses do have or did have basins, not basements, but coal cellars, where the coal would be shoveled into the street in a hole in the ground, in a manhole cover, and it would go down a chute into a big box in the basement, which is your cellar. Then we would have also a Morrison shelter. There was also another shelter called in the garden. Incidentally, the Morrison shelter was issued by the government.
Oh, really?
And so we got these free of charge from the government. Then we also had what's known as a Anderson shelter, which was a hole dug in the ground to a certain depth, and then on top of that was corrugated iron over it. And then on top of the corrugated iron is soil or dirt. We had one, we never used it, but some people did, and some of them were satisfactory, but they were pretty primitive, actually. So that's the essence of the bombing. Us boys, of course, used to go to school with a Mickey Mouse gas mask, carrying a Mickey Mouse gas mask with us. We never had to use it, but we did have to practice with it. And if you put it on, it would scare every cat in the neighborhood. And we would go to school with our bread and dripping lunch, which is a bread spread with the drippings of the fat from the previous roast of the previous week, and which we would put pepper and salt, and we would wrap that up in newspaper and carry that to the school. Now, that was the lunch, and it was not very sophisticated like today's luncheons with all these special fancy plastic boxes and so on and so on. And on the way, we would collect shrapnel, which we were not allowed to do. But of course, we, as boys being boys, we would collect them. And we were told, oh, you shouldn't collect incendiary pieces because of the phosphorus. It might be damaging and could kill you and so on. But of course, you did it. And then we might explore bombed out houses, which again, we were not allowed to do. But boys being boys, we would explore these bombed out houses.
It's fascinating. So this all occurred, you were about what age at this time?
Well, it started when I was 6 and they finished when I was 11. Yeah. But it's enough to, I can remember, this is just vivid memories. It's just like a movie.
Okay, well, and that's a good follow-up question, as is now, as you've progressed over the decades, you obviously have gone to the movies and you have seen depictions of not only World War II, but you know, the other wars, the Korean War, Vietnam War, and all. What kind of sense do you get when you watch some of these movies? Do you get these flashbacks, and you often think of what it was like as a child going through the Blitz?
Yes, occasionally I do, and the memories are vivid, but they don't really bother me in any sense. The only image that has stood out in my mind over the years and has resulted in me dedicating another book I've written or am writing called The Tomahawk Warrior. And this is an American bomber I saw crash in England in 1944. And I saw them pick the auxiliary crew who got there. We got to the site about 30 minutes after it crashed. And the auxiliary crews were there picking up body parts. And they were picking up the body parts of the crew, hands, arms, legs, all blooded, and they were putting them in galvanized bins. That image remained with me all my life. And we can talk about that later, because that was towards the end of the war, when we had moved out of London to a little country town called High Wycombe. And it resulted in me honoring those men because they sacrificed their lives by landing in a farm field instead of crashing on our little village, which we were in at the time. And it flew right over our cottage, and it was in big trouble. And when it exploded, we, of course, heard the blast. It was about a mile away. Anyway, that's a part of another story.
It is a fascinating story that you are now putting into a book form, which I think is going to be a fascinating read for those. Your first book, which I am reading now, Death Watch Beetle, and all, is a fascinating story. You know, I've got so many things going on in my head right now, David. I don't know which turn to take right now, because I was trying to do things a little chronologically to get a sense of where you were and when. But do you want to talk about the books now, or do you want to talk a little bit more about?
Go in your chronological way, and we can move systematically forward.
Okay, so now we are get beyond the war. The war is behind us and all. Around 1945 and all, when the World War II is basically over. Where is David Huntley at that point in his life? How old were you, and what were you doing at that time?
Okay, I was still at school at that time, and I was going to several different schools because we were moving around so much. And we finished up in a town called High Wycombe, which is talked about quite a lot in that book, it's a historical spy thriller. During that time, of course, I began work. I began work as a trainee toolmaker beginning, but eventually became a rubber and plastics technologist by profession. And then I married a beautiful French girl who happened to be in England working sort of au pair at one of England's highest levels girls' school in High Wycombe called Abbey School. And she was working there, and we met and we dated and we got married. And we were married for 62 years before she passed away. During that time, we lived in Paris, we lived in London, and eventually in 1957, England was in a very sorry state. I'm not going to tell you anything political here, but I can tell you that they were in a really bad state, and thousands of English people were leaving the country. They were going to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, because the economy had plunged to such a low degree because of the way in which the politics were going. And so we too decided to make a new life for ourselves in Rhodesia, which eventually, of course, became Zimbabwe. And we spent 21 years in Africa.
And so what is your career path at this point when you go to Africa? We're talking now, what, the late 50s and early 60s?
Yeah, late 50s. And so I became eventually in Rhodesia. I became an assistant technical manager of Dunlop in Rhodesia at that time. And then I moved to South Africa from Rhodesia, and I started my own companies. I had a trading company and a manufacturing company.
And your wife Sophie, what was she doing at this time?
She was, and she became a very good mother of my 4 children. I had 2 daughters and twin sons.
Wow. Folks, I told you at the top of the show, just in my few minutes talking with David at the auto repair shop and everything, he just started spewing a lot of this out at me, and I thought, oh my gosh, there are volumes to this man, and to try.
I'll tell you something really interesting, Stuart. A real bizarre coincidence. Well, there's been a number of coincidences. Let me refer back to the Tomahawk Warrior, the plane that crashed in England. I eventually traced some of the families, and I took them to England, and I managed to get the British authorities, with whom I have a very good contact. I have a lot of, at a high level, I have a lot of contact. And I managed to get the British authorities to issue a posthumous award honoring that crew for the sacrifice they made. And I took the families that I had traced back to England to receive these scrolls of honor. Now, one of the interesting things is that the pilot of that plane, his birth date was the 18th of March. This date has kept cropping up in my life like you wouldn't believe. And for instance, my twin sons were born on the 18th of March. Now, one of them, Alan, one of my sons, he, at 7 years old, was fascinated by all the planes, the airliners coming in to land in Durban, South Africa. We were close to the airport there. And he was fascinated at 7 years old for wanting to be a pilot. He now is a captain on one of America's national airlines. But here is the most interesting thing. The first plane he ever flew in training to be a pilot was the Piper Tomahawk. And the plane that crashed was the Tomahawk Warrior. So and there were numerous incidents of coincidences like this all through my aspect of working on this story. In fact, at one of the services at the church where a remembrance was being made, I spoke to the deacon and mentioned some of these coincidences. He says, David, these are not coincidences. This is God telling you to write this book. And I believe it, yeah.
And that book is out now?
No, that book has taken me 6 years of diligent research and so on, and it's still ongoing. It's probably about another 20% to 25% to be written.
Folks, it's called The Tomahawk Warrior, A Final Honor. And just in our discussions and a little bit of information that I've gathered, there are an awful lot of aspects from that crash that stayed with you, that you mentioned getting the family members of that crew together. But there is also a very fascinating story about a journal. And I would like you to share that story about that journal from one of the crewmen on that flight.
Yes, yeah, that was the navigator of that plane. He had written a diary, and I came into possession of that diary and was able. I'm able to publish it in the book, and it actually enumerates in detail every mission that plane flew, which was 27 missions. Bombing Germany and France, together with some news reports of the day of each mission, which corresponds with some of the information in the diary. What is fascinating is that I was able to trace some of the family of the navigator, two nieces of that navigator. It was their uncle who perished in the plane. And I was able to trace them and to take them to England to receive the Scrolls of Honor from Lord Howe, who I had got to help me with this. And also I was able to arrange for the return of the actual diary to the families by a big, we had a big function in Detroit at a museum with TV cameras, the whole thing, and getting the diary back to them. Mm-hmm.
That in itself is a fascinating story, and it kind of is a tribute to your life from the time that you were a child and witnessed what went on during the war. It's like this has become a part of your life, and your calling. Absolutely. Is to pay a lot of this forward, to follow this. You took these experiences and you started to formulate some of those experiences into the first book, the Death Watch Beetle. And as I started reading the Death Watch Beetle, I kept thinking to myself, having read a little bit about your background, what percentage or so of the characters in the book are kind of patterned after David?
Yeah, well, as you can tell, that particular book was endorsed by very high level in military and intelligence personnel. First of all, Major General Williams, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. He said he relived his career through my book. Mike Baker, who everyone knows on Fox News, was an ex-CIA officer. He also said that my book is factual, accurate, and you can't put it down. Now, everyone is, of course, asked me after reading the book and who know me, how much of that is me? Well, what I say in the beginning of the book is that it will create the imaginations of some people and the memories of others. And I have done diligent research for the book, but also it's partly from personal observations. So you can take whatever you want out of that, but I'm not going to explicitly tell you which is part of the CIA or of military intelligence or me. You have to more or less guess that for yourself.
And that's the imagination part of it that plays into the book as you read through the book. And it's a fascinating book on espionage and a great spy thriller. And all that covers a lot of aspects of the war. It is amazing. You have received it now. Christine has just put up on the screen for those that are interested in the book. As I say, it's a fascinating read. It's a fairly easy read too, and you start reading and you just kind of want to see what's going on in the next chapter. So it's not one of those that you kind of read over 6 months. But it covers a lot of aspects of the war experience. And I'm going to ask you kind of a personal observation, because very often when veterans or people that go through a war, they want to kind of suppress it. They kind of want to bury it in their past. Sometimes it can lead to depression. We have often seen a lot of veterans that end up with homelessness or even the ultimate in suicide, because they just can't get that war experience out of their head. Then there are those like you, David, that take some of that and realize that there is a story to tell and a story to publish and all. What kind of words of advice do you have for those of us that have gone through a war experience to say, how much of it do you want to try and forget? Can you ever forget it? And are you better off channeling it into something that's more positive?
Yeah, no question. To channel it into something more positive, get it off your chest, expunge it from your soul. That's the only way of clearing your mind. And it's very, very difficult for some people, of course, because the images are probably so devastating, far more than even those that I have seen. I have seen dead bodies being dragged out of bombed out buildings, but they're still bodies, they're still shaped, and you might see a bit of blood coming out of their ears or whatever. But the thing that struck me was when the plane crashed and they were picking up pieces of arms and legs. That was very, very significant. That stays with me, but I'm able to get through that by simply expressing and trying to bring closure to some of the families. They didn't even know what happened. And there, in the history of that plane, by the way, there have been some inaccuracies in the unofficial accounts of what happened. And I've been able to clarify all that with the Freedom of Information Act and getting the secret operational records of the squadron. I've been able to determine exactly what plane it was, and so on and so on. So yes, the more detail that one can bring out, the better it is. And I know there's a very good friend of mine, Chuck Hodge, who I belong to a veterans group called Roll Call in Fort Worth, in which there are nearly about 350 to 400 veterans who we meet every month for a luncheon in Fort Worth. It's a remarkable organization. And Chuck Hodge is one of those members, and he is a historian who just voluntarily by himself, he videotapes interviews with these veterans and gets their stories, but he doesn't publicize it anywhere. He just gives it to the family. He gives the records to the veteran, and they can do what they like with it. He doesn't charge anything or anything. And that is a remarkable way of getting some of these veteran stories. And he's done hundreds of them. if not thousands. So Chuck, I take my hat off to him. Where else do we want to go with this?
Yeah, no. The interesting thing is I can see that over the years, what you have done is you have become not only a historian, but you've become, for all practical purposes, an investigative reporter
Yes.
for making sure that what is put in the history books is accurate.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And and that in itself is fascinating. I know that you are on the speaking circuit, that you enjoy going and talking with groups and sharing your experiences and your knowledge of what went on, and that in itself has got to really help your personality, help you feel good about what you are doing to make sure that these stories are continue to be told. And
yes, of course, and it keeps me kicking.
You're how old now, David?
I'll be 86 in December.
And I have to tell you, you are very physically fit. You are very, very active. The mind is as sharp as a tack. And I think that also helps when you're in the presence of other veterans, because they can
Yes.
see, I don't have to be 86 years old and just sit on the couch with a remote in my hand, that
No.
I still have the ability to learn and understand and recall and share.
Yeah, we got some veterans at a roll call who are 100, 102. So yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Pretty remarkable.
What was the start of your decision to write the Death Watch Beetle? How did that all come about?
My late wife had not been well, and I was sort of being a bit of a caregiver and so on. And she had had a quadruple heart bypass, and I felt I had some bit of spare time because I was at home. I was more or less retired, semi-retired then, and I just thought it just sort of clicked, because I had come across this Nazi who disappeared at the end of the war, and he'd never been tried in absentia, even though he was one of the major criminals in the manufacture of the weapons of war. And in fact, he, as an architect, he had designed some of the concentration camps, and he had even been instrumental in sealing the Warsaw Ghetto. So knowing this fact, I thought it was strange that he had disappeared. So there was an incident while I was in Africa. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but while I was in Africa, there was some people I'd met that triggered this memory of ex-Nazis and where they go and so on.
Because they went all over the world.
Yeah, everyone keeps saying, "Oh, he ended up in Argentina." Well, not necessarily. And so that was what triggered it all off, and I began diligent research. If you read my book, there is aspects of history in that book which are very accurate. For example, when I talk about the KGB agent who takes a vessel, an East German vessel, and goes to East Germany with this vessel, if you look up the name of that vessel, that is a factual vessel at that period of time. So all of that that you read in the book, you can more or less take as verbatim.
And that's what makes the book so interesting, is because you're constantly saying to yourself, is this fiction?
Just look it up. Just look it up. Go and Google it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I talk about the geographical, or rather the geological rock formation of a certain place in South Africa that is leading me to a certain area, you can look it up. You'll get the factual information.
Now, your career was in consulting and in international business. Am I correct?
In the United States, yes. I owned a company. In fact, I still own it. I started it in 1979, Huntley Associates, and I still own it, although it's not very active right now, except for my publishing business. But I was in high-tech consulting, contract staffing and recruiting and international business. And I did a lot with the Japanese, for example. And I became some kind of expert in Japanese-American relations and negotiations.
You know, you're a pretty popular fella. You know,
Occasionally.
I found that out, and you have also received some awards all over the world for a lot of the things that you have done, both in England and I mean, most recently, what was the most recent award that you had at was it? Didn't you tell me that it was at a dinner or something with 1,100 people or something?
It was a really prestigious award. I'm extremely humble for having received this, I'm telling you, and quite surprised. It's called the Americanism Medal for 2021. And in March of this year, I was awarded this medal by the Daughters of the American Revolution at the State National Defense Banquet in Houston, Texas, in March. And there were 1,100 attendees, and it was all a big black tie event, and it was pretty classy, actually. And I gave an acceptance speech, which received a standing ovation from 1,100 people. About 1,000 of them were women. So it was quite remarkable. And as I say, I was extremely grateful for this, because they awarded this to me. It's awarded each year to, there are two awards that they make. One is to an American citizen, and the other is to, well, the first one is a natural born American citizen. And the second one, the one I received, is to a naturalized citizen who became citizen and has done a lot of, so they say, I mean, you can read the citation yourself, but I won't repeat it because it's too flattering. But it's because I've done a lot of work for veterans, not just with the Tomahawk Warrior, but with many other things. I've donated money from my books, for example. I donated proceeds from my books to the Daughters of the World War II that helped people go back to Normandy. I've donated to the roll call, the same thing, I still donate to them every year. It's a small donation, but it's something, and I feel grateful that the Americans came to our rescue in Europe. And let's face it, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here today. And my 4 children and my 7 grandchildren wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the Americans coming to the rescue. I can only hope that we do something really positive in getting help to the Ukrainians who are desperately doing what we were doing in London during World War II. Because if that doesn't work out, then God help us.
Folks, if you want to reach out to David with any comments, questions, inquiries, and all, it's very simple. It's jobs, JOBS, at Huntley, HUNTLEY.com, jobs@huntley.com. And if you've got a pencil and paper and you want to jot down the phone number, 972 599-0100. You can reach out to David. Fascinating. And what is the best website for people to visit if they want to see a little more information about the things that you've just talked about?
You could actually go to deathwatchbeetle.net.
Deathwatchbeetle.net. Okay.
Yeah, because up on top of the head of all the page, you'll see different pages you can go to about author. You can see about World War II, the veterans I've talked to, and I put some of their stories up there. French resistance. You can see about my wife under Nazi Germany, and we can talk about that, by the way, if you want.
Yeah, I know your wife was a survivor of the Nazi occupation in France, and you know that in itself could fill up a whole show right there too. And you were married, you said, for 62 years. 62
years, yeah. Mm-hmm. If you want Sophie up there, you've seen number 11 is a school picture of her school, in which. This picture was taken just before the Nazis took over her school requisitioned it for their own use, and she had to move to the boys' school. But before, when the Nazis did, that's her with the arrow pointing and on the inset. You can tell I picked the best girl in the whole class, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and she probably thought you were a charmer too.
Maybe. Well, she must have done. She stuck with me for 62 years. And then number 12, if you look at number 12, this will give you some idea. This is the millions. This is not Sophie, but this is an illustration of the fleeing of the French people fleeing away from the Nazis as they invaded France. And I might tell you, if you put up number 13, this is an illustration of being shot at by Stuka dive bombers. And Sophie had that experience. She was with her family fleeing along the roads, and they had to dive into the ditches on the side of the road because the Stuka dive bombers were diving and shooting at the civilians. And I might tell you that the screaming engine of a Stuka dive bomber is designed specifically to make that noise to terrify civilian populations. Very successful.
And David, just these few pictures, it's almost like today is a deja vu moment. It's like these are some of the same photos we're starting to see coming out of Ukraine.
Exactly.
Where the bombs are dropping and the people are fleeing their homes to go in whatever direction they can to find safety.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sophie was on the road for about I think it was just over 3 weeks or so, and they had to live on whatever they could find on farm fields, chickens they had to kill. The cows were dying in the fields because they hadn't been milked. Because a cow swells up, and if it's not been milked, and then it died. So there were dead cows lying all over the place. They had to forage for food, sleep on straw in barns and things. And then eventually, of course, the Germans told them, go back home. So when she went back home, the school had been requisitioned. She couldn't go back into the school. There's another picture of number 14, by the way, if you pick that up. Number 14, and this is her brother, Jean. Her brother was picked up by the Nazis and sent to, that's number 14A, but that's a letter, because my wife was, there's Jean, her brother. He was picked up by the Nazis and sent to work in Germany under forced labor. So during the duration of the war. Okay, put up number 14A, that letter. Sophie was born in France, okay, but her parents were Polish, and they would get letters from Poland with the with the Hitler stamp on it. So you can see there's some stamps there. And if you put up picture number 15, that's Sophie and I when we were living in Paris in 1955. And if you put up Sophie, picture number 16, that's in 1956. Sophie and I were living in Paris, and that's a picture of her in front of the Eiffel Tower. I don't think you can take that picture today. Number 17.
You can't get that close.
No, well, it's just the way it's different. Do you remember the film The Longest Day?
Yes. Sophia Loren.
Okay, this is The Longest Day. This is Arena Demick. Arena Demick, put up the next picture, which is number 18. That's her there. And Arena Demick, she was originally a Dior model, and then she became a film star with Daryl F. Zanuck in his movie, and then she became a movie star on many, many different films. But Arena and Sophie grew up together in the same village. And if you look at number 19, she came and stayed with us in our house in Allen, Texas in 2003. And that's her and Sophie reminiscing right there.
All right. So you have written this spy thriller, the Death Watch Beetle. You're getting ready to release the Tomahawk Warrior, a final honor, talking about the crash of this. Are you then going to start a book about the life of Sophie? And
I already started that book, and that's still a long way away.
Why did I know that? I can just the passion in your voice and in your discussion.
Go and have a look at picture number 20.
I think what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to schedule another show with you to talk about a lot more things, because you're like a walking encyclopedia.
That's us. That's us when we arrived in the States. That's in the Water Gardens in Fort Worth in 1980. Well, we came here in 78, but that's in 1980.
In 1980.
If you go to picture number 21 quickly, I'll tell you something else. So when Sophie passed away, the City of McKinney put a bench in her honor in Bonnie Wenck Park in McKinney. That's the mayor of McKinney and the parks director and myself.
I have been to Bonnie Wenck Park, and I have been by that bench. It's around the pond.
Yeah, correct. And if you look at number 22, you'll see what it says on the bench. In memory of Sophie Huntley, 31 to 2018, who survived the occupation of France in World War II, but found peace in McKinney, Texas.
That kind of takes everything and brings it right back home, doesn't it, David?
Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm.
Well,
I go
David,
there every couple of weeks. I go and put flowers there.
You're a terrific guy. I can't even begin to thank you for taking the time to be on this program with me. I think I'm going to have to reach out, because we've touched on a lot of things, and maybe there are a few more things we can go a little deeper into depth. I will tell you, folks, if you ever have the opportunity to go to an event where David Huntley is speaking, I think you will find it well worth your while. Whether you are just a common citizen, you're a passionate patriot, or you're a veteran. But David, thank you very, very much for being here.
Yeah, I tell you what, you get 20 or 30 people together in one place, and I'll come give you a talk and show you my book and so on. Yeah.
Well, we will have to do that. And again, I thank all of you for watching Someone You Should Know and sharing a little bit of conversation with David Huntley, because David, you are someone we should know. Definitely. Thank you very, very much for spending the time.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Thanks very much. Okay. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you. Be well.
Well, you.
Someone You Should Know.